that Rav Kook, he passed away 87 years ago. He passed away at 1935, and he was the chief rabbi of Israel, and a very, very important rabbi in the Jewish thought, in the establishment of the state of Israel, and his influence continues until these days. His disciples and the Talmidim of his disciples are continuing his way. One could say that a religious Zionism actually walks in his way. Now, in this shiur, we are going to talk about Rabbi Kook's perspective on the connection between prayer and a study. And we're going to explore two stories about two of the greatest disciples of Rav Kook. And these stories are about how they discovered the greatness of Rav Kook. And surprisingly, both of them did not necessarily recognize Rav Kook's greatness through his intellectual genius or through the fact that he was a very prominent halachic figure and a philosophical giant. Rather, they decided to follow him and to walk in his path because of his prayer and song, which touched their heart and their soul. And the first story is about the meeting between Rav Kook and the Nazir. Now, you could see a picture of the Nazir on page 1, next to a section A. The Nazir was a Rabbi David Cohen. He was known as the Nazir. He was one of the greatest disciples.
Actually a Nazir?
Yes. And he was the editor of a monumental set of books, Orot HaKodesh, The Lights of the Holiness, which I have over here. And in his introduction to this first volume, he tells the story about his first encounter with Rav Kook. And the story goes like this. During World War I, Rav Kook was stuck at the St. Gallen in Switzerland.
That was England.
After that, he moved to be the rabbi of Machzikei Hadat in London. It is actually the community that my great-grandfather and his father used to belong to. So, before Rabbi Kook reached London, he was stuck in Switzerland. And there he was involved in Zionistic activity. And the Nazir was at the time a student of philosophy in the University of Basel. And the Nazir, he was thirsty for knowledge, and he was seeking the truth. and he heard that a Rav Kook was in Switzerland, so he decided to go and visit him in hope that Rav Kook would be able to answer his questions. So on Rosh Chodesh Elul, 1914, the Nazir arrived at the house where Rav Kook stayed in St. Gallen, and he saw that Rabbi Kook was engaged in a halachic discussion with his son, Harav Tzvi Yehuda HaKohen Kook. And then the Nazir waited until they finished the discussion, and then he started talking to Rav Kook about Greek philosophy and Greek literature. However, he was not very moved by that conversation, and Rav Kook invited him to stay with his family, to stay the night in the St. Gallen. And then the Nazir writes in his introduction to this book that I was unable to sleep at that night. Orot HaKodesh, the lights of a holiness, which the Nazir edited from the manuscripts of Rav Kook, which were in later years known as the Shmona Kvatzim. So he writes, in the morning, something happened which changes his fate and also the fate of many others. And he writes like this: at dawn, I awakened by hearing someone singing the morning prayer in such a divine tone. Rav Kook's prayer inspired the Nazir so much that he wrote, I heard the song and became a new man. I found more than I expected. I found myself a rabbi. So this is the story of a Nazir, that he became closer to Rav Kook through his song and prayer. This is the first story. And now we're going to explore the second story. The second story is about Rav Yaakov Moshe Harlap. He passed away about 70 years ago. He was the rabbi of Sha'arei Chesed. It is the Sha'arei Chesed, a neighborhood in Yerushalayim. And he was also the Rosh Yeshiva of Merkaz Harav. And of course, he was one of the greatest disciples of Rav Kook. And you could see a picture of him right below the picture of a Nazir. And the story goes like this, that during Shavuot of year 1904, when Rav Kook was the rabbi of Yafo, Rav Harlap needed to travel down to Yafo for health reasons, and during a Shavuot, so he decided to pray at a shul called Sha'arei Torah in Yafo. And then he tells the following story. I heard how Rav Kook said the prayer of Akdamot in front of the whole congregation with such emotion and awe. I was moved to the source of my soul. From that moment, I followed Rav Kook with great love, and I became his disciple forever. Yes. Right. That's correct. So, these are the two stories which I wanted to tell you. And now, we must ask, what did the Nazir find And Rav Kook's prayer and song that inspired him so much. What did Rav Charlap find? So, what do you think? What do you think was so special that touched them so much that it wasn't the intellectual insights that Rav Kook told them, it was his song? Why do you think it inspired them so much?
I believe that Rav Kook was trying singing such a kavana, like straight from his heart. It's authentic, just authentic. Like there's nobody else in this room besides him, Hashem. That everybody could see that. That inspired them. I believe that's my suggestion.
Beautiful. So you were saying, David, that because that he was so authentic, because that his song and his prayer came straight from his heart, and it went into, and it opened other people's hearts as well. So that is beautiful. What do you think?
That I don't remember exactly which sefer, but it says that truth, that real truth, has like a recognizable quality. When someone's speaking truth, when someone is being authentic, it has a way of like being obvious. Like when someone's speaking, being really authentic, that it's authentic. You don't have to like interpret. Is it true? It's just sort of obvious to you. So that must have been what the Nazir saw with Kotler.
Beautiful. Well, thank you for sharing that. That is a beautiful insight. That the power of your truth is so strong, and especially when it is involved with a prayer. It is authentic. It comes straight from the heart. That is absolutely. So, Rabbi Kook writes in his introduction something very interesting. He actually writes in his introduction of a book called Musar Avicha. Musar Avicha is a beautiful book that he writes about the Tikkun Midot and morality, and his introduction is very, very nice. And he begins his introduction, as you could see over here in source 5. So he begins his introduction with the importance of this serious and in-depth study of Emunah. And he guides the students to organize their ideas in writing, and he also writes the topics that one really should focus on. And he says, you could see over here in source 5, he says here, כל זמן שלא ילמד לעצמו שהתברר לו מעלת נשמת האדם ומעלת ישראל ומעלת הארץ הקדושה וההשתוקקות הראויה לכל ישראל לבניין המקדש וגדולת ישראל ותרוממותם בעולם, כמעט שאי אפשר לתרום טעם עבודה. So he says that as long as one does not study and understand the value of the soul of a man, the nation of Israel, the land of Israel, and the proper yearning for the building of the Beit HaMikdash, and the elevation and the greatness of the nation of Israel, it is almost impossible to taste what real prayer actually is. So, I am going to ask you, what revolutionary idea is Rabbi Kook telling us here?
He's saying that without studying emunah, you cannot really pray properly. You cannot really feel prayer the way you're supposed to.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Whoever does not study emunah properly, according to Rav Kook, he also cannot pray properly. And over here we have to try and understand this. Why do you think that the two are connected? What is the connection between prayer and study? What do you think?
Well, if somebody prays without you have to study in order to understand why you're praying, what you're praying for. There's obviously the most basic level of everybody wants health and but there's also a deeper level of wanting praying for to get closer to Hashem. That's like a deeper level of prayer, and without studying, without really learning about emunah, then you're sort of just you're fulfilling the mitzvah of prayer, but you're not really connecting to it, and you're not really in touch with what you're doing. You're just sort of going through the motions.
I would also say that
Beautiful idea, Yishar Koach.
the more a person learns, like in general, like about the world, like scientific facts, like also like if he learns about halakha, like anything, the more a person learns, the more he's knowledgeable, the more he understands the will and the divinity of Hashem that is revealed in this world. And therefore, he can put much more emphasis on his prayer, and when he prays Hashem for all what he does, he can really appreciate and understand and mean it. I think that's a connection.
Very nice. So, I agree with everything that you said. You said your beautiful insights. I just want to add something small, that in Parashat Ekev, so it says, you could see it in Esor 6, Ule'avdo bechol levavchem, and you shall serve him with all your heart. So the question is, what does serving Hashem mean? How could you serve Hashem? So Chazal say, you could see it over here, ולעבדו זה תלמוד, דבר אחר ולעבדו זו תפילה. To serve him, it is study, or additionally, to serve him is prayer. So also prayer and also study are ways to serve Hashem. And now, Rabbi Soloveitchik says about this is something very interesting. You could see a picture here of Rabbi Soloveitchik. He proves from here that I am just going to really mention just before Rabbi Soloveitchik that the Maimonides, he brings both of these teachings. Not only one of them, he brings both of them in his book of the mitzvahs. That serving Hashem is also through study and it is also through prayer. And Rabbi Soloveitchik says that that prayer and study are connected together. There is a special value in praying at a place where one studies. So the fact that we pray upstairs in the Beit Midrash, it is actually fulfilling what the Sifrei is talking about, what the Chazal is talking about, that there is a deep connection between prayer and study. And he says that in order to connect the fulfillment of a mitzvah of a serving Hashem with all one's heart through his study, with a fulfillment of a mitzvah of a serving Hashem with all his heart through prayer. So one serves Hashem also through prayer and also through study. So this is the idea of the Rabbi Soloveitchik. I just want to add one another explanation of Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, the former chief rabbi of England, who passed away just 2 years ago. And he said that prayer is speaking to Hashem, but study is listening to Hashem. And you need both. You also have to form this connection to Hashem, speaking to Him, and you also have to listen to Hashem.
Parts of a conversation, speaking and listening. That's how. So you can't converse if you're only doing one. If you're only speaking or only listening, it's not a conversation.
Beautiful. Wow. Beautiful. Yishar Koach. It was especially to come. If I would only hear what you said now, it is a beautiful idea of Yishar Koach Gadol. So, Rabbi Kook adds another dimension, and he says that there is another connection between a prayer and study, and this you could see in the source 7. So he says that a man can serve Hashem through prayer properly only when he studies in depth the ideas of Emunah, which are actually in the words of a prayer. And if Chazal said that prayer is serving Hashem with all one's heart, so the ideas of prayer must be close to one's heart. So how can one's prayer be closer to one's heart? The answer is through studying about the value of man's soul, about the nation of Israel, about the land of Israel, about the destiny of the nation of Israel, and about the yearning for the building of a temple. These are the ideas that without them, it is almost impossible to pray. And this is what a Rabbi Kook says. You could see in the source 8. ואם לא ידע מעלת נפשו, איך יתפלל ברצון שלם בהרגשת חיסרון? שינחהו השם יתברך דעה, בינה והשכל. If one does not know the value of his own soul, how can he pray with complete aspiration and the feeling of need that Hashem will grant him knowledge, understanding, and intellect? ואם לא ידע מעלת ישראל, איך יתפלל בלב שלם על גאולתם? And if one is unaware of the value of the nation of Israel, then how can he פרץ הקדושתה? איך יתפלל על בניין ירושלים? And if one does not know the value of the Holy Land, its divine potential, its holiness, how can he possibly pray for the building of Zion? So, if man does not know the value of these ideas, he is unable to feel the absence of a current situation, and he is unable to pray to perfect the situation. So, if you would turn the page, please, and we're going to summarize over here that a Rabbi Kook, he was one of the greatest of the Jewish thinkers in the last generations. He had such a deep understanding of the essence of man's soul, the greatness of the nation of Israel, the holiness of the land of Israel, and his prayer actually was filled with these ideas. And then his disciples, Rav Nazir and Rav Charlap, when they heard his prayer, they didn't only hear his prayer, they heard his study. They heard the song of Rav Kook's Torah. And this is what inspired them so much, because that through his song, he actually sang the Torah. And I would like to just add a song that a Rav Kook wrote. I am first going to read it in Hebrew, and then I'm going to read it in English. So you could see it in the source 10. B'nai Torah sharim, HaTorah הממלאה את מוחם ואת ליבם, היא המתרוננת מפנימיותם מנשמתם. אשרי הלומדים תורה, שתורתם היא שירתם. Those who study Torah sing. The Torah fills their mind and hearts. It rejoices from their inner self and soul. Praiseworthy are those who study Torah, for the Torah is their song. So I think that this, a song that a Rav Kook wrote, he actually sang, and it describes, I think, the song that Rav Nazir and Rav Charlap were able to hear, but inspired, that gave us so much inspiration. So this is what I wanted to study here together with you in memory of a Rav Kook, who again he passed away today, 87 years ago. So if there's any questions, any insights, please.
The song, it's sung today, like in the Knesset or like in synagogues? Like, is there no tune to it? Like, is it singing?
There should be a song to it. Actually, my brother, he composes songs. Maybe it's an idea. I can tell him to think of a tune for it, because it's a beautiful song. I think it's got so much meaning to it. Yeah.
Was Rav Soloveitchik considered like a Talmud of Rav Kook in some way?
No. He actually paved the way, his own way. Rabbi Soloveitchik, he was the grandson of a Reb Chaim from Brisk, the great Reb Chaim, that most of the yeshivas today actually they study the Brisker way, they study a Talmud in the Brisker way. But additionally, Rabbi Soloveitchik was also a giant in Jewish thought and Jewish philosophy, and he wrote many important books like the Lonely Man of Faith, the Halachic Man. That's right. Very, very important books. And he also paved his own way in studying Talmud. and he actually built a bridge between the brisker way and the way of a connecting the world of emunah, Jewish thought, and also the world of a halakha, which was different than the brisker way. The brisker way doesn't deal with philosophical ideas. They do deal with general questions where you try to bring together different concepts of the Talmud, but they don't deal with the philosophy at all. But Rabbi Soloveitchik actually paved the way. Now, why am I telling you this? Because that you asked, was Rabbi Soloveitchik a disciple of a Rav Kook in any way? So my answer is that not directly. He never studied in Merkaz Harav. I don't know if he studied the works of a Rav Kook, mainly because of the fact that at the time they weren't really known. Only some of them. Most of the works of a Rav Kook were published in more recent years. But in many ways, his school of thought was very similar to Rav Kook, and he reached it in his own way. For example, Rav Kook talked about Torat Eretz Yisrael, the Torah of the land of Israel, and his vision was to connect between a halakha and machshava and the Jewish thought. And that is what Rabbi Soloveitchik did in some of his shiurim. And also Rav Kook was a very Zionistic in his own way, of course. Like, there were many aspects that he opposed secular Zionism, but he actually created a new way of a religious Zionism. We could say that when Herzl passed away, but I should mention that this year we are celebrating the 125th anniversary of when Herzl stood in Switzerland and Basel in the hotel of the Three Kings, and of the famous balcony that he leaned over. So when Herzl passed away, so Rav Kook said something very, very interesting that might be also controversial, but what he said was that Herzl was the beginning of Mashiach ben Yosef. Now, there are actually two different Mashiachim. There's the Mashiach ben Yosef and there's the Mashiach ben David. And everyone has got a different task. The task of Mashiach ben Yosef is to deal with physical needs of the nation of Israel, the independence of the nation of Israel. And Mashiach ben Yosef's task is to deal with the spiritual needs of the nation of Israel. So Herzl, in a way, actually brought closer the task of Mashiach ben Yosef to deal with the independence of the nation of Israel. So, in that way, also Rabbi Soloveitchik was very Zionistic, but from a completely different approach. Like, he did not put an emphasis on the connection between the nation of Israel and the land of Israel and the Torah of Israel, as Rav Kook actually put an emphasis. But he believed that the only future for the nation of Israel is in the land of Israel, and that the nation of Israel has to have independence from pragmatical reasons, not necessarily from the same reasons of Rav Kook. And both of them also believed in studying secular studies, of seeing the beauty and the knowledge in literature, science, philosophy. Both of them studied philosophy.
Hashem created the world, so there's nothing contradictory about studying science and studying the world. You know, it's not going to. Why? If Hashem created the world and it's part of it and we live in it, then there's no reason we shouldn't.
That's right. Both of them tried to connect between Torah and science. Both of them deal in their own way with the theory of evolution, for example. Both of them tried to build bridges between science and religion. So both of them were very similar, but they were also very different. So if that is just in a nutshell of the differences and the similarities between Rav Kook and Rav Soloveitchik, but it's a very good question what you asked. Okay, so good evening, everyone.